It wasn't the flash of the paparazzi's cameras that blinded Eleanor Vance that night. It was the chilling clarity of betrayal illuminated under the 1,000 crystal chandeliers of the Grand Astoria ballroom. She stood beside her husband, billionaire tech mogul Julian Vance, a perfect picture of high society grace in vintage Chanel. Her hand resting protectively on the gentle curve of her pregnant belly. They were the golden couple, the envy of New York. But in seconds, a woman in a scandalously crimson dress would shatter that illusion, and Eleanor would prove that while a queen may be silent, her checkmate is devastatingly loud. The air in the penthouse overlooking Central Park was always still, a carefully curated silence that cost more than most people's homes. Eleanor Vance breathed it in the scent of white peonies and old money clinging to the damask wallpaper. At 34, she was the epitome of inherited elegance, a woman whose Ashworth lineage traced back to the city's founding patrons. But her family's name, though respected, was a gilded artifact. The fortune had dwindled to trust funds and traditions. Julian Vance, on the other hand, was entirely new. He was a hurricane of ambition, a tech visionary who had built Vance Innovations from a garage in Queens to a Silicon Alley titan. They met at a university benefit. She an art history major with a keen mind for strategy. He a brilliant engineer with a deficit of polish. Eleanor had been his making. She'd smoothed his rough edges, taught him which fork to use, and most importantly, leveraged her family's connections to secure his first round of major funding. She wasn't just his wife. She was the architect of his ascent, the silent partner who transformed his raw code into a dynasty. Now that dynasty was preparing for its coronation, the annual Starlight Children's Foundation Gala, an event they were chairing. It was Julian's moment to cement his status, not just as a titan of industry, but as a philanthropist, a modern-day Carnegie. "The Vanity Fair piece will be legendary," Julian said, striding into the living room. He loosened the silk tie of his Brioni suit, his reflection gleaming in the floor-to-ceiling windows. He kissed the top of Eleanor's head, a gesture that had once felt intimate, but now felt like a perfunctory branding of property. They're calling it the Vance era. "It's wonderful, darling Eleanor," murmured, turning a page of her book. Her heart no longer fluttered when he entered a room. Instead, a quiet, cold watchfulness had taken its place. The change had been gradual. It started with late nights at the office that stretched into early mornings. Then came the hushed phone calls, the scent of an unfamiliar perfume, Chanel No. 5. A classic, but not her classic, lingering on his suit jackets. He bought her a Patek Philippe watch, exquisitely diamond-encrusted, after a week-long business trip to Geneva, from which he returned with a tan too perfect for boardrooms. He became more attentive in a showy, guilty way, like a magician distracting the audience with one hand while the other performs the trick. Eleanor was no one's fool. The Ashworths might have lost their fortune, but they had never lost their shrewdness. She had hired a discreet private investigator, a former MI6 agent named Alistair Finch, whose reports were delivered in plain manila envelopes and read like a cheap novel. The other woman's name was Isabella Rossi. 25 years old, an Instagram influencer who went by the handle The Gilded Lily. She peddled a fantasy of luxury, posing on yachts she didn't own, and in private jets she was merely a guest on. Her latest benefactor, it seemed, was Julian. Alistair's photos were a gallery of clichés, clandestine dinners at Balthazar, a weekend in the Hamptons, a stolen kiss in the back of Julian's Maybach. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself, but the sheer unoriginal vulgarity of it. Julian, the man she had molded into a king, had chosen a court jester. Tonight was the gala. Eleanor had seen Alistair's final report that morning. Isabella Rossi was on the guest list, her ticket purchased through a shell corporation that linked back to a private Vance Innovations expense account. She was planning to be there. This wasn't just an affair anymore. It was an invasion. As her stylist Antoine put the finishing touches on her hair, Eleanor looked at her reflection. The baby, their son, kicked gently. For months, she had been paralyzed by a quiet, simmering rage. She had considered every option, a private confrontation, a messy divorce, a public exposé. But none of it felt right. Destroying Julian would mean destroying a part of herself, the part that had built this empire. But as she clasped the Ashworth pearls around her neck, the only significant piece of jewelry she had left from her family, a different idea began to form. It was radical, terrifying, and utterly final. It wasn't about revenge. It was about legacy. Her son would not be raised in the shadow of a scandal, nor would he inherit a kingdom built on a lie. He would inherit a name cleared of its tarnish, and a future secured by his mother's strength, not his father's fortune. Perfect Madame Vance Antoine, said his voice reverent. Eleanor met her own eyes in the mirror. They were clear and cold as glacial ice. Yes, she said softly, her hand once again resting on her belly. It will be. Downstairs, the custom Rolls-Royce Phantom was waiting. Julian stood by the door, resplendent in a Tom Ford tuxedo. He smiled a perfect camera-ready smile. "Ready to own the night, my love?" he asked, offering his arm. Eleanor took it, her touch light as a feather. "More than you know, Julian," she replied, her voice a silken promise. "More than you'll ever know." The Grand Astoria ballroom was a symphony of excess. Light from the chandeliers fractured through thousands of champagne flutes, scattering rainbows across the faces of New York's elite. The low hum of conversation was a currency of its own, a blend of stock tips, political gossip, and discreet character assassinations. At the center of it all stood Julian and Eleanor Vance, greeting their guests with practiced perfection. Eleanor moved through the crowd like a galleon in calm waters, her vintage Chanel gown shimmering a serene smile fixed on her face. She exchanged pleasantries with hedge fund managers and aging socialites, her voice never wavering. She was an Ashworth. She was born for this. Public poise was a language she had mastered before she could read. Inside, however, a storm was gathering. Every new face that appeared at the grand entrance sent a jolt of anxious electricity through her veins. She was waiting. Julian was in his element, basking in the adoration. He clapped men on the back, kissed ladies' hands, and spoke animatedly about Vance Innovations' new philanthropic arm. He was playing the part of the benevolent king, oblivious to the fact that his kingdom was built on a fault line. "Eleanor, you look radiant," cooed Beatrice Croft, a woman whose face was pulled so tight it seemed a stranger to emotion. "Pregnancy suits you." "Thank you, Beatrice." "We're very excited," Eleanor replied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Then she saw her. Isabella Rossi made an entrance, not a quiet arrival. The crowd parted for her, as if she were a celebrity, though most of them had no idea who she was. She wore a gown of screaming crimson silk, a color so audacious in this sea of tasteful navy and black that it was an act of war. It was cut low in the front and high on the thigh, a dress designed not for elegance, but for impact. Her dark hair was styled in glamorous waves, and her smile was a predatory slash of red lipstick. She wasn't just attending, she was making a statement. She drifted through the ballroom, a shark in a shimmering fish tank. her eyes scanning, searching until they locked onto their target, Julian. Eleanor felt Julian stiffen beside her. A flicker of panic crossed his face before it was replaced by a mask of indifference. He turned his back slightly, pretending to be engrossed in a conversation with the senator. But it was too late. The serpent was in the garden. Isabella didn't approach them. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she began to work the room with a terrifying social prowess. She laughed with a young tech billionaire, charmed a grizzled oil tycoon, and posed for a selfie with the editor of Vogue, who looked both intrigued and appalled. She was building a power base, drawing the room's energy and attention toward herself, pixel by pixel, conversation by conversation. The whispers started almost immediately. "Who is that?" "Some influencer, I think. My daughter follows her." "What is she doing here?" "She looks conspicuous. I heard she came with Mark Renshaw, but she hasn't spoken to him all night." Eleanor watched a cold knot tightening in her stomach. This was worse than she had imagined. Isabella wasn't just a mistress content with lavish gifts and secret weekends. She wanted a throne. Tonight was her coup d'etat, a journalist from the New York Post's infamous Page 6. A man named Barry Fleet with a nose for scandal sidled up to Eleanor. "Mrs. Vance, quite a turnout." He began, his eyes flicking over to Isabella. "Your husband has certainly brought a diverse crowd together." Eleanor's smile became a shield. "The Starlight Foundation is a cause that unites people from all walks of life, Barry." Of course, he set his own smile thin and knowing. "And who is that lovely lady in red?" "She seems to be the talk of the evening." Before Eleanor could formulate a dismissive reply, Julian reappeared, his arm sliding possessively around her waist. "Barry, good to see you. Don't you have some real news to cover?" His tone was light, but his grip on Eleanor's waist was tight, a silent warning. "Just admiring the view," Julian Barry said, giving a small, insolent bow before melting back into the crowd. "Who invited her?" Julian hissed into Eleanor's ear, his voice low and furious. Eleanor pulled away slightly, her gaze unwavering. "I believe her ticket was paid for by the Vance Innovations Special Projects Fund," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "An account I'm sure you're familiar with." The color drained from Julian's face. The realization that Eleanor knew hit him with the force of a physical blow. His carefully constructed world began to tremble. For a moment he looked not like a titan of industry, but like a small boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "Eleanor, It's not what you think," he stammered. "Isn't it?" She replied, her voice like chipping ice. "We can discuss what I think later. Right now you have a speech to give. You are, after all, the man of the hour." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the center of the room, the whispers of the crowd swirling around him like smoke. The grand charity gala. His night of triumph was rapidly becoming a stage for his public execution. And the executioner, he was slowly realizing, might not be the girl in the red dress, but the wife in the vintage Chanel. The dinner service was a masterpiece of culinary art, but the food on the $1,000 plates went largely untouched. The atmosphere in the ballroom had shifted from festive to fraught. Every eye was either on the head table where Julian sat rigidly beside a glacially composed Eleanor, or on Isabella Rossi, who had strategically seated herself at a prominent table near the stage, holding court like a conquering general. When the time came for the keynote address, a hush fell over the room. The CEO of the Starlight Foundation introduced Julian, listing his accomplishments in a glowing tribute that, under the circumstances, sounded like a eulogy. Julian walked to the podium, squaring his shoulders and forcing a smile. He was a gifted public speaker, his charisma a tangible force that had won over boardrooms and investors alike. He began his speech, his voice smooth and confident, speaking of innovation responsibility and the power of giving back. For a few minutes, it seemed he might just pull it off, that he could use his sheer force of will to wrestle the night back under his control. Eleanor watched him from her seat, her expression unreadable. She felt a pang of something, not pity but a mournful sense of loss for the man he used to be, for the partnership they once had. He was a brilliant man, but his ego had become a fatal flaw, a crack in his foundation that was about to bring the whole edifice crashing down. He was reaching the crescendo of his speech. And so I am immensely proud to announce a personal pledge from the Vance family. A commitment of $50 million to build a new pediatric research wing. The applause started to swell, but it was cut short by a sudden movement. Isabella Rossi was on her feet. She moved with a liquid grace, gliding towards the stage. Security personnel shifted, unsure of how to react. This was a charity gala, not a political rally. She looked distressed, vulnerable, a stark contrast to her predatory circling earlier. She stopped at the base of the small stairs leading to the stage, her hand resting on her stomach. Her crimson dress under the focused stage lights looked like a splash of blood. "Julian," she said, her voice trembling, but carrying across the silent ballroom, thanks to the ambient microphones. "Julian, you can't." Julian froze, his mouth half open. The teleprompter scrolled on, but he had lost his place, lost his composure, lost everything. The entire room held its breath. This was no longer a gala. It was a theater of humiliation, and everyone had a front row seat. "I'm sorry," Isabella continued, tears now streaming down her artfully made-up face. "I can't let you do this. I can't let you stand up there and talk about family and children, not without acknowledging our family, our child." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. The sound was like the sea pulling back before a tsunami. Cameras which had been respectfully lowered were now raised. The flashes began a frantic, merciless strobe effect, capturing Julian's stunned face, the tears on Isabella's cheeks, and the horrifying, beautiful spectacle of a man's world ending in real time. Isabella's hand was still on her stomach, a deliberate theatrical gesture. The implication was clear, a direct and devastating counter to the image of the gracefully pregnant Eleanor sitting at the head table. "He loves me," Isabella declared to the silent captive audience. "He was going to leave her. He promised. He promised to give our baby his name." Every word was a perfectly calibrated missile. Julian was paralyzed, a statue of a man caught between his pristine wife and his volatile mistress. He looked wildly from Isabella to Eleanor, his eyes pleading. But Eleanor's face was a mask of calm. There was no anger, no hysteria, no tears. There was only a profound, unsettling stillness. She didn't scream or run, with the poise of a queen abdicating a throne she no longer wanted. "Eleanor." Vance rose to her feet. The rustle of her Chanel gown was the only sound in the cavernous room. She looked at Julian, her eyes holding his for a long, final moment. In them, he didn't see hatred. He saw something far worse: dismissal. It was the look of a creator deciding her creation was a failure and was ready to tear it down and start again. Without a word, she turned her back on him, on Isabella, on the entire gawking spectacle, and walked. She didn't hurry. Her steps were even and deliberate as she proceeded toward the grand exit, her head held high. The crowd parted for her once more, but this time it was with a mixture of awe, pity, and terror. As the heavy ballroom doors swung shut behind her, the silence she left in her wake was more damning than any accusation she could have ever uttered. Julian Vance was left on the stage, exposed and utterly alone. The ruins of his perfect life scattered at his feet. The spotlight was still on him, but all it illuminated was his shame. The chauffeur, a stoic man named Thomas, who had driven for the Ashworth family for 30 years, saw Eleanor emerge from the Astoria's grand entrance. He saw the phalanx of paparazzi swarming their questions, shouted like accusations. He saw her face unnaturally calm under the barrage of flashbulbs, and knew, without being told, that the world had irrevocably changed. He had the car door open before she reached the curb, shielding her from the worst of the onslaught as she slid into the cool, leather-scented sanctuary of the Rolls-Royce. Home. "Thomas," she said, her voice even. "Straight away, Mrs. Vance," he replied, navigating the limousine out of the chaotic driveway with practiced ease. The journey back to the penthouse was silent. The glittering skyline of Manhattan blurred past the tinted windows, a city of dreams that had, for her, become a prison of lies. But she wasn't escaping. She was liberating herself. Julian, she knew, would be expecting hysterics. He would anticipate a night of screaming matches, thrown objects, and tearful recriminations. He would assume he could manage the situation, that he could deploy his well-honed tools of charm apology and expensive gifts to smooth things over just as he always had. He believed he was the king in this chess game. He had no idea that he was merely a pawn and that she had been setting the board for this exact move for months. The moment she stepped into the silent penthouse, she did not go to the bedroom to weep. She went to her study, a room Julian rarely entered, dismissing it as her hobby space. It was paneled in dark cherry wood and lined with first editions, but its most important feature was a state-of-the-art encrypted phone. She sat at her mahogany desk and made her first call. It was not to her mother nor to a friend. It was to Marcus Thorne, senior partner at the law firm of Sterling and Crest, a man whose ruthlessness in corporate law was legendary. He was old money like her, and understood that the most brutal battles were fought not with volume, but with paperwork. "Marcus," she said, when he answered his voice alert, despite the late hour. "It's Eleanor Vance. It's time." "I saw the news alerts," he replied, his tone devoid of surprise. "Are you certain he brought her to the gala?" Eleanor said simply, which told him everything he needed to know about the depth of Julian's arrogance and disrespect. "The instructions you gave me in May are prepared," Marcus said. "The triggers are all financial and legal. They require your signature on the authorization documents. I have them ready. Once you sign, the sequence is irreversible. It will take approximately 12 business hours for the primary transfers to clear. He will be completely locked out by Monday morning. I'll be at your office at 7 a.m., she said. I will be waiting. And Eleanor?" "Yes, Marcus. Well played." She hung up and made her second call, this time to the head of her private security team. "David, I need you to facilitate my departure from the penthouse. I will be leaving within the hour. I will not be returning. Please ensure Mr. Vance is not able to contact me. Change all my numbers. My destination is the safe location we discussed." Her third call was to Alistair Finch, the investigator. "Alistair, I need the complete file. Everything you have on Isabella Rossi. Her financials, her associates, any documented falsehoods in her public persona. And one more thing, find out if she's actually pregnant. I need definitive proof one way or the other." Eleanor worked with chilling efficiency. This was not a woman scorned. This was a CEO executing a hostile takeover of her own life. For the past 6 months, ever since Alistair's first report had landed on her desk, she had been meticulously preparing for this moment. While Julian was distracted by his affair and his preparations for the gala, Eleanor, with the help of Marcus Thorne, had been quietly restructuring their entire financial world. The narrative Julian believed was that he was the sole genius behind Vance Innovations. The reality was that Eleanor, using the power of attorney he had foolishly granted her years ago during a complex international merger, had become the ultimate authority. She had established a series of nested holding companies and family trusts ostensibly for tax purposes and estate planning for their unborn son. Julian, bored by the minutiae of legal and financial structuring, had signed every document she'd put in front of him, eager to get back to designing new algorithms and basking in the glow of public adoration. He had no idea that the majority of his personal shares in Vance Innovations, his vast real estate portfolio, and his liquid assets were not in fact in his name. They were in the name of the Ashworth Vance Legacy Trust, an entity of which she was the sole executor, and he was merely a conditional beneficiary. A beneficiary whose access could be revoked under a very specific, carefully worded morals clause. A clause that cited public infidelity and actions that could bring the family name into disrepute as grounds for immediate and total forfeiture. She had built his kingdom, and she had, with the stroke of a pen, built the legal mechanism to take it all away. She packed a single suitcase with essentials, leaving behind the designer gowns, the glittering jewels, and the life that had become a beautiful lie. As she walked through the opulent living room, for the last time, she paused by a silver-framed photo on the mantelpiece. It was from their wedding day. They looked so young, so full of promise. A tear, the first she had allowed herself to shed, traced a path down her cheek. She wept not for the man he was now, but for the man she had once loved, the man she had helped create, and the man who had, in the end, proven unworthy of the crown she had placed on his head. She wiped the tear away, her resolve hardening once more. The past was a ghost. Her future and the future of her son was all that mattered now. The Queen had made her move. Now it was time for the world to watch the king fall. Julian stumbled into the penthouse just before dawn, reeking of stale champagne and defeat. The gala had imploded. After Eleanor's dramatic exit, the event had descended into chaos. He'd fled the stage, hounded by questions from his board members and the press, leaving a bewildered Isabella to face the fallout alone. He spent hours with his PR team, a crisis meeting in a sterile hotel conference room, trying to spin a catastrophe into a misunderstanding. Their advice was unanimous: fix things with Eleanor. Publicly, she was the wronged party. The pregnant wife, the picture of dignity. She held all the cards. He expected to find her in their bedroom, a fortress of sorrow. Instead, he found the room empty. Her side of the closet was bare, her jewelry box open and vacant, save for the gaudy Patek Philippe watch he had given her. On the pillow was a single white envelope. His hands trembled as he opened it. It wasn't a letter filled with rage or heartbreak. It was a cold, formal notice from Sterling and Crest, informing him that effective immediately, Eleanor Vance had filed for divorce on grounds of adultery. It also informed him of a temporary restraining order citing emotional distress, and instructed him to direct all communication through her legal counsel. He laughed a harsh, broken sound. A restraining order. A divorce. It was dramatic, yes, but manageable. He was Julian Vance. He had an army of lawyers. They would settle. He'd give her whatever she wanted, the penthouse a generous alimony. He could weather this. He would release a statement, apologize for his lapse in judgment, and in a few months the scandal would fade. He picked up his phone to call his own lawyer, but the line was dead. He tried the landline. It too was disconnected. A cold dread, colder than anything he'd felt on that stage, began to seep into his bones. He went to his computer to check his accounts to begin the process of moving money and protecting his assets. Access denied. He tried his private banking portal. Access denied. He tried his trading account. Access denied. A message flashed on the screen. For information regarding this account, please contact the Office of the Executor for the Ashworth Vance Legacy Trust. The name hit him like a physical blow. The trust. The boring paperwork Eleanor had him sign over the years. The estate planning he had dismissed as tedious formalities. He had thought it was about protecting their future. He never imagined it was about protecting it from him. Meanwhile, across town, in a sun-drenched suite at the Carlisle, a hotel chosen for its legendary discretion, Eleanor was signing the last of the documents Marcus Thorne had prepared. The suite was her temporary command center, and Marcus, a portly man with eyes as sharp as a hawk's, sat opposite her. "The sequence is initiated," Marcus confirmed, stacking the signed pages into a neat pile. At 9:00 a.m. Eastern Time, the Morals Clause forfeiture protocol within the Legacy Trust was activated. It was triggered by no fewer than 200 separate verified news articles from accredited publications detailing last night's events. The evidence is, to put it mildly, overwhelming. He explained the brutal mechanics of the trap she had laid. First, the transfer of all liquid assets from your joint accounts into the primary trust account. That completed an hour ago. He is, for all intents and purposes, without cash. His credit cards, which are tied to those accounts, will be declined. Eleanor nodded, her face impassive. Second, Marcus continued, is the seizure of transferable assets. The deed to this penthouse, the house in the Hamptons, the chalet in Aspen, and the villa in Lake Como. They are all owned by a holding company, which is in turn owned by the trust. He is now, legally, a guest in his own home. And the company, Eleanor asked, her voice steady. The most elegant part of the plan, if I do say so myself, Marcus said, with a thin smile. Your husband's controlling interest in Vance Innovations, 51% of the voting stock, was never in his name directly. It was held by that same holding company. As of this morning, you, as the sole executor of the trust, control that 51%. You are now the majority shareholder of Vance Innovations. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. She hadn't just taken his money. She had taken his creation, his identity, his entire empire. He will fight it, Eleanor stated. He will try, Marcus corrected. He will claim coercion, that he didn't know what he was signing. But every document was signed with his own lawyers. Present. Lawyers you encouraged him to hire to ensure his own due diligence. We have records of every meeting, every email in which he stated he was too busy with innovation to read the fine print and delegated the final review to his team. His negligence is not a legal defense. It is, in fact, the very rope with which he has hung himself. A secure laptop on the table chimed. It was an email from Alistair Finch. The subject line was succinct: Isabella Rossi. Eleanor opened it. The file was comprehensive. Financial records showed Isabella was deep in debt before she met Julian. Social media analysis revealed a history of fabricated sponsorships and inflated follower counts. But the final attachment was the masterstroke. It was a medical report surreptitiously obtained by one of Alistair's contacts. Isabella Rossi was not pregnant. She had never been pregnant. The entire public spectacle, the tears, the hand on her belly, it was all a calculated performance, a desperate high-stakes gamble to force Julian's hand. Eleanor saved the file. This was not a weapon she would use immediately. It was the final devastating card she would keep hidden, to be played only when the time was right. She looked out the window at the city below. For years she had lived in Julian's shadow, the quiet, elegant woman behind the great man. They had all underestimated her Julian Isabella, the whole of New York society. They saw an Ashworth and thought of brittle tradition and quiet grace. They never bothered to look closer and see the mind of a Wall Street predator, the patience of a master strategist, and the will of a survivor. "What is your first move as head of the company?" Marcus asked, bringing her back to the present. Eleanor's gaze was fixed on the Vance Innovations Tower, its gleaming spire a monument to the man she had both built and broken. "My first move," she said, her voice laced with steel, "is to make a donation." Monday morning dawned over Manhattan gray and indifferent. For Julian Vance, it felt like the beginning of a war. He was holed up in a glass-walled conference room on the 48th floor of his lawyer's office, a sterile box of chrome and black leather that felt more like an observation deck for his own demise. His lawyer, a portly, grim-faced man named Arthur Hayes, sat across from him, a stack of unpromising legal briefs, forming a fortress between them. "She can't do this, Arthur," Julian said, for the 10th time, pacing the room like a caged animal. His Tom Ford suit, the very armor of his success, now felt like a costume. "Freeze my accounts. Seize the properties. It's a scare tactic. We hit back, we file injunctions, we sue for something coercion, undue influence." Arthur sighed, polishing his glasses with a silk cloth. "Julian, we've been over this. Your signature is on every page of the trust documents. You had your own counsel review them. You emailed Eleanor and I, quote, handle the boring stuff, I've got a world to build. Legally, her position is ironclad. She built a cage and you walked into it, signed the lock, and handed her the key." Julian scoffed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "She's just angry. This is an emotional play. She'll calm down. Once she realizes what she's doing to the company, to our legacy." He was cut off by the large television screen, mounted on the wall. It was tuned to a financial news network, the volume a low murmur. A breaking news banner flashed in crimson across the bottom of the screen. The anchor, a woman with a severe haircut and a serious expression, looked directly into the camera. "We are getting stunning news this morning from the world of philanthropy," she announced, her voice resonating with managed excitement. The Starlight Children's Foundation, which just this weekend held its annual fundraising gala, has confirmed it has received a single anonymous donation of an unprecedented scale. "We are talking about a gift that will fundamentally alter the landscape of pediatric medical research for decades to come." Julian stopped pacing, a flicker of annoyance on his face. "Who cares about some charity donation? Turn that off." But Arthur held up a hand. His eyes narrowed at the screen. "Wait," he said, a new tension in his voice. The anchor continued, "While the source remains anonymous, sources familiar with the transaction have confirmed the donation is comprised of a massive block of stock in one of Silicon Alley's giants, Vance Innovations, as well as the full liquidated value of several high-profile real estate assets, including a penthouse overlooking Central Park and a waterfront estate in the Hamptons. The air was sucked out of the room. Julian stood, frozen, his mouth agape. The penthouse, the Hamptons house, his stock. It couldn't be. It was a coincidence, a bizarre, impossible coincidence. The total value of the donation, the anchor paused for dramatic effect, is estimated to be a staggering $1.8 billion. A gasp was audible from the newsroom floor. Financial analysts were brought on screen, their faces a mixture of shock and awe. They speculated wildly. Was it a foreign government, a reclusive tech billionaire liquidating their fortune? The sheer audacity of the move was all anyone could talk about. Julian's phone, which had been buzzing intermittently with calls from his panicked board members, suddenly lit up with a notification. It was from the Wall Street Journal. His heart hammered against his ribs as he read the headline, the words, searing themselves into his brain. Eleanor Ashworth Vance revealed as mystery donor in 1.8B. Philanthropic coup. Seizes control of Vance Innovations. He sank into a leather chair, the phone slipping from his nerveless fingers. Arthur picked it up and read the first few paragraphs aloud, his voice a monotone dirge. In a move that has stunned the financial world, Eleanor Ashworth Vance, wife of embattled tech mogul Julian Vance, has been confirmed as the sole source of the record-breaking donation. Citing a morals clause within the Ashworth-Vance Legacy Trust, of which she is the sole executor, Mrs. Vance assumed control of all marital assets following Mr. Vance's public infidelity at Saturday's gala. Her first and thus far only official act has been the complete transfer of those assets to charity. A spokesperson for Mrs. Vance, Marcus Thorne, of Sterling and Crest, states, Mrs. Vance believes that a fortune amassed under the banner of family should serve to protect the futures of other families. This donation will honor the original intent of the Starlight Foundation, a cause she has always held dear. It wasn't a scare tactic. It was an execution. He hadn't just been outmaneuvered. He had been gutted, erased. The money, the houses, the art, they weren't just things. They were him. They were the tangible proof of his genius, the scorecard of his life. And she had taken that scorecard, set it on fire, and used the warmth to toast her own sainthood. The public wouldn't see this as a ruthless corporate takeover. They would see it as the ultimate act of poetic justice, a righteous and magnificent act of charity. His phone began to ring, a shrill, insistent sound in the funereal silence of the room. The caller ID flashed Isabella. He numbly accepted the call. Julian. What the hell is going on? She shrieked, the carefully constructed vulnerability of the Gala replaced by a raw, screeching panic. The news. They're saying you're broke. They're saying she has everything. Tell me it's not true. It's a complication. Bella Julian managed, his voice hollow. My lawyers are handling it. It's a temporary. Temporary, she spat the word, dripping with contempt. My American Express was just declined at Cartier. My driver called and said the account for the car service has been terminated. You promised me a world, Julian. You promised you would leave that cold witch and give me everything. And I will. He pleaded the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. I just need time to fight this. A cruel, humorless laugh echoed down the line. Fight with what, Julian, you have nothing. Do you understand that I attached myself to a rocket ship, not a flaming piece of wreckage? I am not going down with your sinking ship." "Bella, wait. Don't call me again," she snarled. "You've ruined me." The line went dead. He stared at the phone, a monument to his own spectacular stupidity. He had risked his kingdom for a woman who wouldn't stand by him for a declined credit card. As if the universe had one final blow to deliver, an email notification popped up on his screen. It was forwarded from his now former COO, a man he had mentored for a decade. There was no message in the body, only the forwarded internal memo that had just been sent to every employee at Vance Innovations. The subject line read, "A new chapter for Vance Innovations." He opened it, his eyes scanning the cold corporate prose authored by his wife. "To the employees and board of Vance Innovations, today marks a new chapter for our company. A chapter defined by integrity, accountability, and a renewed focus on our core mission of innovating for a better future. To that end, the board of directors under my new leadership as chairperson has unanimously voted on a change in executive leadership. Effective immediately, Julian Vance has been removed from his position as CEO and all other roles within the company and its subsidiaries. His access to all company property and systems has been revoked. We thank him for his initial vision in founding this company and wish him well in his future endeavors. Further announcements regarding interim leadership will be forthcoming. Sincerely, Eleanor Ashworth Vance, Chairperson of the Board." He was a footnote. A thank you for your service in the history of the empire he had built. Staring at his reflection in the dark, silent television screen, Julian Vance finally understood the full, terrifying scope of his defeat. Eleanor had never wanted the money. She hadn't wanted the houses or the company. She had wanted to take away the idea of him. She had transformed his wealth from a symbol of his power into a public monument of his failure. The world would forever remember him not as the genius who built Vance Innovations, but as the man whose wife gave away his entire fortune on the day she left him. He was left with nothing but an expensive suit, a mountain of legal bills, and the agonizing echo of his own hubris. The aftermath of the Vance implosion was not a fleeting storm, but a permanent change in the city's climate. Julian Vance, once a Sun King, around whom the tech and social worlds orbited, became a black hole. His name was now a synonym for hubris, a cautionary tale whispered over Negronis at the members-only clubs he could no longer enter. He existed in a state of suspended humiliation, living in a minimalist corporate apartment in Battery Park City, with borrowed furniture and walls that seemed to absorb all sound. The vibrant kiss of his former life was replaced by an oppressive silence, broken only by the relentless hum of the news cycle detailing his own demise. He tried to fight back a general with no army. He called old friends titans of industry who had once courted his favor and laughed at his jokes. The calls went unreturned. The one time he did get through to a hedge fund manager he'd known for a decade, the man's voice was full of a cold, unfamiliar pity. "I'm sorry, Julian. I can't be seen to be involved. You understand. It's business." In a desperate act of self-preservation, Julian agreed to a prime-time television interview, believing his charisma could still win the public over. It was a catastrophe. Seated opposite a sharp, unsympathetic journalist, his arguments came across as the pathetic whining of a dethroned monarch. He blamed Eleanor's emotional state. He blamed Isabella's manipulation. He blamed everyone but the arrogant man staring back at him from the monitor. The public's verdict was swift and brutal. Online, he was branded Billionaire Baby, a meme-worthy spectacle of entitled delusion. The interview did not salvage his reputation. It buried it in concrete. His final connection to the man he once was, a collection of rare Patek Philippe and Audemar's Piguet watches, was sold at a private, deeply discounted auction to cover the first wave of Arthur Hayes's legal fees. As he handed over the last timepiece, a watch Eleanor had given him on their 5th anniversary, he finally understood. He hadn't just lost his fortune. He had lost his past, and with it any conceivable future. Isabella Rossi's fate was a swifter, more vulgar public execution. Alistair Finch's perfectly timed leak to the New York Post landed with the subtlety of a grenade. The headline on page 6 screamed, "Gilded Lily's baby bombshell, a blatant, bogus bluff." The article was a masterpiece of journalistic savagery, complete with excerpts from the leaked medical report and quotes from insiders who described her as a predatory social climber. Her digital empire crumbled overnight. The comments on her Instagram, once filled with adoration, became a torrent of ridicule and hate. Her brand, built on a foundation of aspirational fantasy, became toxic waste. Within a week, her accounts were deleted. Isabella Rossi simply vanished, her spectacular ascent matched only by the breathtaking speed of her fall. While the ashes of their former lives settled over New York, Eleanor was breathing clean air. She had retreated to a sprawling but understated stone manor in the Hudson Valley, a property purchased discreetly through a trust. It was a place of old-growth oaks and rolling hills where the loudest sound was the wind in the trees. The manicured silence of the Park Avenue penthouse had been a void. The natural quiet of the countryside was a presence, a healing force. She was not, however, in hiding. She was in command. From a secure, state-of-the-art office overlooking a serene English garden, Eleanor Ashworth, Vance proved to be a more formidable leader than Julian had ever been. She did not rule through charisma and grand pronouncements, but with quiet competence and lethal precision. Her first major directive as chairperson was to cancel 3 of Julian's most expensive ego-driven moonshot projects, redirecting the massive R&D budget towards sustainable technologies and a new data ethics division. It was a move praised by the market as both fiscally responsible and forward-thinking. The stock, after its initial chaotic plunge, began a steady, confident climb. She appeared only once via a crisp, pre-recorded video to the shareholders, her presence calm, authoritative, and visibly pregnant. The message was clear. Vance Innovations was under stable visionary leadership. The era of the reckless boy king was over. The reign of the queen had begun. One crisp autumn afternoon, as a tapestry of red and gold leaves covered the lawns, Marcus Thorne's black sedan crunched up the gravel driveway. He found Eleanor in the library, a fire crackling in the hearth, a cup of herbal tea in her hands. She looked serene, the sharp edges of her city persona softened by the peaceful surroundings and the gentle curve of her pregnancy. "It's done," Marcus said, placing a slim leather folio on the antique table beside her. He signed the final divorce papers this morning. He contested nothing. Frankly, he has nothing left to contest with. Eleanor opened the folio. Her eyes scanned the legal language that formally dissolved her marriage, her expression unreadable. She picked up the pen Marcus offered. Her signature, Eleanor Grace Ashworth, was fluid and decisive. She had deliberately dropped the Vance. "What will become of him?" she asked, her voice devoid of either malice or pity. It was a simple question of logistics. Marcus adjusted his tie. "He's a ghost. The cautionary tale we discussed. His lawyers have dropped him. The last I heard, he was trying to pitch a new app to some third-tier venture capitalists in a coffee shop in Brooklyn. No one is investing. The name Vance is now radioactive. He has no capital, no credibility, and no allies. A quiet finality settled in the room. This was the end of the story. Eleanor felt a faint, ghost-like pang of sorrow, not for the man Julian had become, but for the brilliant, ambitious young man she had once loved and helped build. That man was long gone, consumed by the very ego she had helped to inflate. After Marcus left, Eleanor walked out into the cool, late-afternoon air, her hand resting on her belly. Her son kicked a strong, reassuring movement. She had wondered in the quiet of the night if her actions had been too cold, too destructive. But looking out over the tranquil valley, she knew she had done the right thing. This wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of purification. She had not destroyed a legacy. She had saved it from corruption. Julian's fortune built on her strategy, and his genius had become a monument to his arrogance. By giving it away, she had transformed it into a force for healing, for hope for children who needed a future. She had taken a story of sordid betrayal and turned it into a legend of philanthropy. Her son would not be born a Vance heir to a tarnished name and a litigious, scandal-plagued fortune. He would be an Ashworth, and his inheritance would not be a stock portfolio, but a story. The story of his mother, a woman who, when her kingdom was threatened by a faithless king, chose not to wage a bloody war, but to simply sign it all away to a better cause, and in doing so build a new, truer, and far stronger one for him in its place. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn, but for Eleanor Ashworth and her son, it was a new dawn. What an incredible story of betrayal, intelligence, and ultimate empowerment. Eleanor Vance's journey shows us that the most devastating response to disrespect isn't loud, emotional revenge, but quiet, strategic brilliance. She didn't just get even. She rewrote the entire game, turning her husband's fortune into a force for good and reclaiming her own narrative in the most powerful way imaginable. It's a gripping reminder that true strength often lies in foresight, dignity, and the courage to burn down a gilded cage to set yourself free. What do you think? Was Eleanor's move a masterstroke of justice or a cold, calculated act of destruction? What would you have done in her position? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you were captivated by this story, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who appreciates a story of epic revenge, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more true-life dramas you won't want to miss. Thank you for listening.